Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here. Thank you for coming to our little Neuroprivacy and Arts and Culture Symposium. We have a pretty exciting lineup of speakers here tonight. Has anyone not been to Gray Area before? Cool, only a couple people. So very briefly, we've been around 18 years now here in San Francisco, and our focus both on supporting emerging creative practices driven by emerging technologies, and also teaching artists how to align their practices towards engaging with things happening in the world. I was talking a second ago to our curator Wade, who just described what we are doing as rapid response curation, which I think is pretty true in a lot of ways. We try and organize both exhibitions and performances and sort of conference material, talks like this, that's really keeping pace to help us try and understand what's going on here, and not in the future, but even here in the present these days. And so we do that through these kind of events. We have education programs if you're interested in workshops. We teach technology skills through the production of creative work and have a whole lot of offerings in that case, and also have an incubator program that's getting ready for its next round. And so, if you like what's going on here tonight, we have a membership program, which is a great way to support at our mid-levels. Not only do we have some reciprocal museum admissions to a lot of North American museums, but you get into everything we produce here for free. And if you come a lot, we're basically paying you to come. So it's a good deal. You should avail yourselves of it. And so I think that's about it. We're going to get going here. We're going to start out by having each of our speakers, panelists tonight, give an introduction to sort of what they've been working on in their practice, and we'll come into a panel discussion and get to the bottom of it. So we're going to start with Amy Karle.
I'm Amy Karle. I research and create artworks that ask what it means to be human at this time of merging with technology, and our agency and ability in that to shape better outcomes and shape better futures. I was born with a life-threatening birth defect. My body became medical data far before I could ever give consent. The last time I can truly say I gave any kind of informed consent medically was probably 5 or 6 years ago because of all the AI that's in the systems. And online, it's been at least 10 years. As AI and technological systems grow more opaque, more embedded, more networked, it becomes harder and harder to understand what we're consenting to, how our data is being used, what it's being inferred from it, what stories are being made about us from it, and how it's shaping us as well in return. Neuroprivacy sits at the center of that inquiry. For me, neuroprivacy is about, who owns our brain data, and also about freedom of inner life, about authorship of ourselves, about mental autonomy, about creative and critical thinking, and the conditions under which our imagination can remain free. So imagine this kind of chain. You are the original thinker, and you're wearing a neuro headset, and one company owns the neuro headset. The software company, there's another software company that mediates it. And then their thoughts are put out to AI through a model trained on millions of other people who probably didn't give consent. And that interprets and outputs another form. And all of that can be recorded. So at the end of that chain, who owns the thought? It's probably not the original thinker. And it's probably not actually what you were originally thinking. How do we know it's ours if it's mediated and then if it's reflected back to us? That gets pretty confusing. How do we retain our cognitive sovereignty in that, our ownership? Who has the agency in this, and who is accountable in this system as well? So this might sound like a far-off future, but a lot of this is already here. You know, many of us already move our attention, expression, our thoughts, and our decision-making through AI-mediated systems every day, through voice interfaces, recommendation systems, algorithmic feeds. You know, our earbuds use AI and we speak through that. We tell it our thoughts through voice commands. Social media platforms are designed with what captures and holds our attention, what is addictive. AI systems often generate outputs faster than we can assess, we can absorb or question. So all of this is happening so fast that it becomes really overwhelming and exhausting. It divides our attention, and that leads us to making not such good decisions. There's also a real danger of homogenizing our thinking, where more and more of us are using AI that draws from the same pre-trained pool, so we end up thinking alike. It also regurgitates alike. So in all of this, can we say that we even truly have cognitive sovereignty right now? That our thoughts are our own? Do we have mental autonomy? Can we make decisions based on our authentic values and thoughts? Or are they nudges from algorithms that are being fed to us? These are the kinds of things I think about often. And I'm also asking, how do we flip that script? I've been asking these questions through my practice and biofeedback artwork since about 2010. The early biofeedback art was durational performances using, where I would lay meditating for 5 to 8 hours connected to vintage analog sanding processor here, depicting this dynamic internal landscape that's happening inside of us all of the time, of thought, emotion, intuition, these things that we can't necessarily measure but make us very much human. And that work really explored how we can use technology as a mirror back to ourselves, how we can witness our inner life. But then I started asking questions about how do we write back to that? So using neural headsets and brainwave interfaced, I used my own brain output through an art and tech interface to teach myself to be more musically inclined. I was never very musically inclined. So I used this system, and over 2 weeks of being connected and seeing this information fed back to me, I started hearing music in the real world, and I started dreaming in sounds. And even now, I still dream in sounds. So this was absolutely amazing. It opened these extraordinary possibilities, and it also made me very aware that these tools don't only produce outputs, that they're also shaping us, our thinking, our choices, our actions, and who we become. I can easily envision a future where highly autonomous integrated systems surpass human intelligence in a number of domains, where AI, biotech, and even quantum technology becomes enmeshed with our bodies and our beings. Brain-computer interfaces, neurotech, being able to access all the information on the internet and other sources as well, like connect with other people, with animals. There's so many amazing opportunities in this, and also very scary scenarios as well. How we choose to govern this and how much agency we understand that we have in it will absolutely shape the future and the outcomes that we experience. But the future doesn't have to be something that happens to us. It's something that we create. So through my practice, I try to create works where people can stand inside these questions early enough so that we can see that we still have the power to choose differently. Thank you for standing inside of those questions with me.
And up next, we have Barbara Nerness.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barbara Nerness, and I'm super excited to be here with this awesome panel, and also thank you to all of you for coming and being a part of this conversation. It's really great to see so many people here. I'm just going to wait for my slides. Okay, cool. So I currently teach at San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and last year got my PhD at Stanford at the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. So I was in Dr. Takako Fujioka's Neuromusic Lab, where we look at performers when they're playing music and also when you're listening to sound. And we use electroencephalography, or EEG, in order to look at brain activity on the scalp, so non-invasive. And you may have heard of something called neural oscillations. These are different frequency bands that correspond to different brain states. So from slowest to fastest, we have delta, which dominates during deep sleep, theta, which also has to do with sleep, but memory as well. Alpha, which is around 10 hertz, strongest wave that I looked at, and it has to do with attention, as well as focus and relaxation. And then beta, around 20 hertz, has to do with movement, activity, and also beat tracking if you're listening to a music with a rhythm. And then gamma is the high frequency, kind of perceptual binding local stuff. But my work really focused on alpha, since when you're playing music, you're often paying attention to many different sources of input. So you're trying to come up with what to play, and you're also listening to other people. So don't worry about this, but we looked at a study with 2 piano players going back and forth, and we had them play a very simple score as well as improvise. And in the lower left, we basically saw a difference in this alpha band when you're improvising, especially when your partner is too, which is, I think, what, if any of you are musicians or in creative fields, you have sort of this internal ideation mode that you can go into where you block out distractions. So this was one of the things that I found really fascinating to learn about myself and see in the data. The other thing I'll mention is that in order to do a study on human subjects, you have to pass an ethics panel called the Internal Review Board, or IRB. And they review everything that you're going to do with human subjects, and also make sure that all of our data is confidential. So my experience with neuroprivacy has been in kind of this more academic institution of with an IRB, but I think there's some parts of that that are important. I don't like the side where all the research stays in the institution, so that's why I'm happy to be here. But I also got into biosignals for making music because I used to be a guitarist. I got a repetitive strain injury in both hands, had to stop playing, and was like, what can I do? Well, I have all these biosignals, I have all these rhythms going on inside my body, so how can I use that to make music? So I now perform with my heartbeat, breath, and GSR. So there's an accessibility component, and there's also kind of a curiosity of learning about myself and using that to connect with others through music. So this piece with a Swedish ensemble. Ave on the left is performing with her alpha frequency band, and when she scrunches up her face, she's actually, your muscles make a lot of activity for the EEG sensors, so they could add noise too. And Joel's gonna go for a run and then live sample his heartbeat.
Det tidlösa flygplanet har inte landat.
It's pretty fast. It's gonna slow down. This was a pretty long piece, so I've cut it down. But this was a group that performs on kind of alternative instruments. So we created this together. And last year, I started playing with a GSR sensor. This measures conductivity across your skin. It was the old school lie detector test. That's not very accurate, though. But for me, it responded a lot to breath. So I was up at Jurassic and took a lot of time lapses of the fog moving in and out, and programmed this installation so that as I breathed in, the fog moved in, and as I breathed out, the fog moved out. And all of the sensors that I've used in these two examples are very low cost and accessible. That's been kind of important to me, so that I'm hoping to share them more, and this installation will be up at SF Art Fair, so you can go and play with it. It responds very differently to everyone, and I think it's been more of a learning process that I'd really like to share more, and that's why I feel like art, for me, is the more powerful way of doing that. So I hope that we can also have a conversation about the role of art and how involving each other in a more creative process is important, especially with regards to the privacy of that data that we have, that we're generating, because I think these tools and technology can be used to connect us as well, and that's what I'm hoping for. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And up next we have Gary Wolf.
Hi. Some of you may know me. I'm Gary from Quantified Self meetups over the last 20 years. I'm currently working on a book called Learning to Observe, about how people use empirical observation, often from sensors, but often actively gathered, to make discoveries about themselves and their world. Sorry, I don't have my slides in front of me. So I'm not an artist. I am a writer by vocation, and so it's very fun for me to be here, and I'm expecting mainly to learn. I thought I would show you just a couple of things. Let's see if I can make that go. There we go. Oh. There should be two slides. Oh. Sorry. I missed my middle slide there. Could you help me? Or do I have to do it? Okay, let's see. Oh, could we go back one? There we go. This is a couple of slides from a 2011 Quantified Self meetup with people doing EEG measurement. And there's a distinction that we found really useful in our work. And I thought I would just share it with you maybe as a framing concept between foreground and background observations. Background observations are general, and they're often gathered with sensors, and they can be very meaningful, but often not in and of themselves. So they have to be kind of packaged up into meaning to make something kind of significant on a personal level. And foreground observations are our thoughts, our private interests, our goals, our intentions, and those are also records that people can make and work with, but they're often intentionally gathered, not gathered through kind of an automated process. And the bottom image there is a tool that we use quite a bit, which is a one-button tracker. You just press the button and it records a timestamp. It doesn't record any other information, and you just open it as a table, right? And it's just a list of times. It's very accurate. You don't set the time. It picks up the time from a satellite. So you get really microsecond accuracy, but you get no metadata and no exposure, because you're the one who knows what that timestamp means. And the image there is one of my colleagues' data from a year of tracking the tics associated with his Tourette syndrome. He has thousands of observations through 4 stages of education and kind of learning in a medical center about kind of how to connect, how to relate to his tics. He actually was hoping to reduce his tics, which did not work, interestingly, but he did change his relationship with his tics. So in our kind of framework, the interesting action here is not in the foreground observations or in the background observations, but in the mixing zone. It's where those two kinds of records come into contact with each other. It's where the rules and the resources, but also the tools and the skills are. And we work a lot in the mixing zone. Some of what we do is formal research supported by some government and foundation and some partners. A lot of it is teaching, but the most interesting stuff is the tool development. And I was kind of tempted to show you some of the tools we're developing, but I think I'd rather leave it to the artists mainly, and I'll just take a big step back and give you a quote from Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's my typo there. It's not really 17, which says that everyone has the right freely to participate in scientific advancement and its benefits. And I think in the mixing zone is where we get not just the risks, because the risks are real, but also the agency and the permission that we grant ourselves and that we also demand from others to participate as kind of active thinkers and not just as subjects of experiments or research. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Now we have Kim Old.
Hi everyone, my name is Kim Old. I'm a founding team member at EMOTIV. I've spent more than a decade working at the intersection of neurotechnology, research, and real-world deployment of BCIs. EMOTIV builds non-invasive EEG-based neurotechnology that helps translate brain signals into usable insights and experiences across research, enterprise, and consumer contexts. What brings me to this conversation is a simple belief. Brain data deserves exceptional care. As neurotechnology moves from labs into everyday life, we need to make sure privacy, consent, transparency, and user control are treated as design requirements, not optional extras. I'm excited to be part of this discussion because the question isn't not only what this technology can do, but what we want to protect as it becomes a part of culture, creativity, and daily life. EMOTIV has been partnering with artists and creatives for over a decade across many different projects, including explorations of sound and vibrations in the brain, to neurofeedback-powered light installations, and even brain-generated music. We've created a platform that really opens up BCI technology for builders, makers, and creators to explore the human brain and the human experience in new and creative ways. Thank you so much to Gray Area and Anastasia for inviting me here today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kim. And we're just going to do a quick computer plug in here, and then Rhonda.
And I'll advance from here.
Yeah. Okay. We just want to extend it this way. There we go.
Hey! Thank you.
Why is your screen turned off? I don't know. That's not gonna work. That's not gonna do anything. What is
I
that?
can also just read notes off my phone.
Okay. Are you sure? I'm sorry. But you can just tap next.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about a project, Other Known Tomorrows. This was a collaboration I did with Dr. Ying Wu, And we had participants smell 7 scents that were selected for their ability to induce nostalgia and read their brain waves while they talked about those memories. And then we had them smell a set of 7 scents selected for their kind of abstract qualities, and then had them describe the future that might smell that way. And, sorry, I'm kind of trying to drive from 2 places here. So I then used both the physiological and behavioral data that we got from that pilot set, and I trained an AI and created animations that kind of moved through both the past and future and back again for all of the data for the individual pilot tests that we ran. The animation was displayed both outside of the gallery on a video wall, and it was also projected inside. And then in the sculptural object, I developed a fragrance that was based on some of the notes or the fragrances that had the highest signals across the pilot data. Each of the notes in the fragrance, the base, the middle notes, and the top notes, were choreographed almost like a song to play along with the video. So they moved through and kind of came into being and then faded out. I was going to talk about IRB, but my colleague over here already did. So maybe I'll also kind of talk about Article 18 of the Universal Human Rights, which gives us all freedom of thought and autonomy of thought as a basic human right. I've worked with scent a couple times in my practice. The first time was here. This is foil. I made it in the wake of the Occupy movement protests. And it was based on, it was 3 individuals wearing t-shirts, and I distilled the scents and then kind of bottled the scent of the human. And I was using methods that I kind of borrowed from the CIA, and they were developing what they called a mechanical dog to identify humans based on their scent. It's more accurate than retinal or fingerprint scans, and it also has the added benefit of not needing your consent to be taken. In each of those projects, I was using scent olfactory data as a place of algorithmic resistance. So olfaction and sense, kind of unlike visual or other biometric data, is diffuse, temporary, and kind of hard to isolate and process. And AI is really good at things that can be computed mathematically. So finding heuristics in data sets, organizing information. And scent becomes something that's really hard to induce directly using AI or computational systems in general. And here's where my notes become really useful. I'm going to try to wing it. Let's see how I go. So Section 702, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act gives the FBI broad mandate to gather data systems without a warrant. And what ends up happening is they can scoop up data based on foreign nationals, but if you've contacted a foreign national, there's a back door through this law where government intelligence agencies can get your data, use it, and they're sharing it with Homeland Security and local police agencies as well. So they are scooping data from lots of different places, social media, communications, and if we're not really careful, as we move forward with some of the commercially available neuro devices, the data that they have aren't necessarily protected under HIPAA. They're also not necessarily protected under any of our kind of biometric laws that we have governing like biometric data outside of HIPAA. So it's going to be really important that we make those distinctions clear, because it's possible that these agencies could collect our biometric data under the 702 Surveillance Act. And a lot of corporations start out with the greatest of intentions, but history shows us that the desires of corporate interests and the desires of kind of humanitarian cultural values generally tend to diverge at a certain point. And some corporate executives are very clear about what they want for the future, and we should believe them when they tell us about the future that they're building, and we should pay really close attention to the types of relationships that they're developing with our government agencies, and we should be really, really weary and pay very close attention to the integration of our medical, our consumer, and the militaristic databases. We should also be very wary when these government agencies start reaching out and requesting consumer behavioral data that's been algorithmically analyzed that has made trillions of dollars for these corporate interests. And especially we should pay attention when civilians are prosecuted as terrorists based on that information for assumedly belonging to these imaginary, made-up ideological entities. I'm going to end here with a call to action. So 702 is up to expire in April 20th of this year. And there are representatives who are trying to extend it unamended. So please, 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 this link, this QR code will take you to 5 calls. There's a script there. Call your representatives, tell them to vote no, or at least provide an amended version of 702 to protect all of our data. So thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. And last but certainly not least, we have Jaron Lanier. Hey.
Oh, gosh. Hello, hello, hello. No slides. I'm going to discuss 2 related things. One is some experiences in how working for privacy rights backfired in recent decades, and the other is about where this all goes when we can not only read from brains, but write to them, which is probably coming. It already exists for animals in labs, so why not us? On the first topic, around the turn of the century or so maybe a quarter century ago, I co-founded a thing called the Data Protection Advisory Board for the European Union with Alessandro Butarelli, and we became the little think tank that from which sprouted a gigantic project called the GDPR, which is Europe's attempt to control data gathering from people. Alessandro has passed away. He was a remarkable character who deserves a bit of mention. He made his name as a prosecutor of mafia people in Sicily. So he was like, I'm not scared of tech companies in Silicon Valley. I've survived all these assassination attempts. You nerds mean nothing to me. And I was like, okay. So it started off, I think, as reasonably enlightened and foresightful as we could have been at that moment. Then came decades of EU, I'll be polite and I'll call it process. And what we ended up with is this giant, mega set of regulations with this huge institutional structure around it. Now, I think it's better that it be there than not be there. And Europeans are somewhat protected compared to Americans. And so I think it's good it's there, but there are a few things that went awry, and I think they deserve discussion. One of the things that went awry is that in order just to even talk about what regulations for privacy would be, you might think it's easy. Well, just don't take people's data. Well, really? Because people want to do things. I don't have social media accounts, but I bet most of you do, right? Why? I don't know. Why? Okay, I'm not gonna, but anyway, you do. Okay, so you signed up for them, you signed this giant EULA, the little agreement, you didn't read it, even the people who wrote it didn't read it. I once spoke to a 2,000, I think, lawyers in a giant convention who write these things, and I asked for a show of hands who's actually read the ones that they worked on actually really all the way through, and there were like 3 hands. So no human actually reads these. It's just a general, like, yeah, do with me whatever thou wilt. I give up, I surrender. It's just a surrender document. Nobody actually even knows what you've surrendered. You have no idea. How many of you have read it? Nobody. How many of you have signed them? Yeah, all of you, yeah, okay. So the thing is, in order to make this regulated, right now it's laissez-faire in the US. In Europe, it's regulated by the GDPR. It's so complicated that it ended up creating an enormous advantage for big companies as opposed to little companies or individuals. Little companies really can't even do it, okay? So sometimes they do anyway, but the truth is it's very, very hard. So you'll see a really different startup scene in Europe, and this is part of the reason why. And this actually, you might say, well, this is because the Europeans are too bureaucratic, but actually I think it's intrinsic to a mistake in the idea. And the mistake is very simple. We don't know what privacy is. It's a term we use all the time, but the truth is, if you think privacy is just preventing data from going here to here, the only way to use that as a starting point is to end up with something incredibly complicated to cover a bunch of use cases, which then turn out not to foresee the actual future that arrives. Because privacy is actually a really tricky concept. It rests on deep philosophy about what an individual is. Many people in the new environment of media and tech are skeptical of the individual anyway. Like, we all share, everything is like this big mush anyway, so what is the individual artist? Does it matter? And so at the point where you're thinking that way, what is the individual at all? But then if you think, no, individuals are important, and I'm of that camp, what are you talking about? How do you define one? Like, what is it? It's actually really, really hard. So I think the right definition needs to be articulated, and I wish I could just tell you what I think it is, but I can tell you what I think it approximately has to be, which is the right to not be fucked with. Okay? That's what privacy really, really means. Now, that's not a new idea. Like, there's a famous comment in American jurisprudence, and I think it's due to learned hand, but I might be wrong about that, that privacy is the freedom to be left alone. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but something like that. I also find it interesting, like if you read the American Constitution, one of the basic rights is to not have the American military use your home for barracks, which you might think, well, why would they? Well, it used to happen, so it was important enough to make a right. And this idea that you can't have the government use your head for barracks, I think is a really interesting starting point. Okay, it doesn't resolve all the difficulties of definitions, but let's talk about it a little bit now in light of where the technology will probably go in the future. Now, is Mary Lou here by any chance? Did you come? Oh, okay. The Bay Area is definitely the hotbed in the world for advancing brain interfaces. Neuralink is famous. Is anybody here from science? No? Okay, well anyway, there's some open water. There's some amazing companies in the Bay Area, and they are going to crack this. This is going to happen. We're going to be both reading data from the brain of vastly greater detail than things like EEG, which is a very messy signal. I love it, but it's messy. It's a very rough signal. We're going to be getting detailed signal, but furthermore, we're going to be writing into the brain. It's going to happen. People like me will write vicious op-eds criticizing it when it happens. But, you know how it is. The tech bros are on an unstoppable sacred army, and it'll happen. So, so, what do we do with that? Where do we go? Now, I'm a refuser. A refusenik is somebody who was refused. That's often a misused term, but I don't use social media because I think it's brain manipulation and it's not worth it, and you don't get enough from it. And when you use it, you're mostly addicted. So I don't. Maybe I'll decline the brain thing too. I don't know. But most of you will do it. If you have social media, you're going to have a brain thing, okay? Because it's going to come from similar companies, and you're going to have similar motivations, and all your friends are going to do it, and you're going to feel old if you don't do it, and all of those things are going to happen. So you're going to have this thing, and it's going to read your, and it's going to write, you know. If you're a kid in school, you're going to need it, or you won't be as smart as the other kids. And if you're an athlete, you're going to need it, or you won't be as good as the other athletes. And if you're a musician, you know, whatever. Whatever you do, you're going to need it. And people are going to say, oh, it's your only way to keep up with AI. And it'll be a big, which I think will be a bit of a scam because the AI was trained on you in the first place and the whole thing. But anyway, it's all going to happen. You're going to fall for the scam. You're going to believe it. Even if you don't believe it, you're going to use language that reinforces it every single day. Okay, so what does regulation look like? What do we want in that world? What does not being fucked with look like when that technology is around? Okay, and I think it looks like a few things. We have a lot of work to do together on this, so I don't claim to have the whole picture for you, but I think I know a little bit. I think I know a little bit about it. One thing is that a very simple regulation would be if an external party can predict a reaction from embedding or incepting some kind of information into your brain through a direct channel, then that should be forbidden. In other words, the predictable manipulation of you, even if it's by your own request, is the violation of your autonomy. And the unpredictability is where you live. That is the room that the army shouldn't be able to house themselves in. You know, that's where autonomy has to be. What other definition could there be? So I think predictability can become an acid test of illegality in using algorithms to manipulate people. I think that also should be true for social media and AI bots and the whole thing. But for direct implanting of information into the brain, I think it's a start. I think it's a start. Now, that could backfire because you could say, well, the Meta of tomorrow, or maybe it'll still be Meta, just implanted random signals in a bunch of people, so they evaded your regulation, and all they needed was for 10% of them to do this thing, and then they make money from the people paying them or whatever. I'm sure there'll be a million scams. This is only a start. It's only a start, but at least I think it's talking about the right thing. To simply say we'll block the information will both be ineffective and inadequate and lead to, I think, really complicated, expensive side effects. A fundamental issue is what consent means once you've already signed the EULA and surrendered broad consent, as you all have, and therefore you all will. Okay, you get that? You are the problem, I am the problem, but you have demonstrated you will be the problem for this. Do you understand that? Own it. Don't pretend. I know you, you know me. Let's not pretend. You're going to do it, okay? So once you've signed the EULA of the future, which might just be with your brain, I don't know, our hands will have atrophied by then into limp tentacles, I suppose. Once you have signed broad consent that Google or some company's gotten into your head, what then? Is there some form of intermediate consent? That becomes an extremely important question. Are there settings at that point? Or have you so given up any ability to have an anchor or context that you no longer can make any decision, or consent is gone? It's like a one shot and then it's gone. You're a robot. You belong to whoever owns the interface at that point. I think developing these intermediate levels of consent will become an essential thing. So I'm currently collaborating on one, and this is like crazy early work, but I have a collaborator named David Eagleman. David, you didn't come up, did you? No. He's a neuroscience professor at Stanford. And the notion is, if you implant something, can you do it in such a way that it's connected with a qualia or with an internal sensation that will stay attached to it even when you remember it and reconceptualize it inside your brain? So we think we can, here's the analogy to that. Natural gas is odorless, but there's an odor injected into it so that if there's a leak, you'll notice it, right? And so we want to do something that's similar to a natural gas leak for incepted information that'll persist even if you reflect and even if you cogitate on it. Can you do it? You know what's weird is we think actually you might be able to. Like we think there's room there. So that would create the potential. That's really important because you might say, well, that's awfully cynical of you. Wouldn't it be better just to not have the problem in the first place? Yeah, except you're the one who's going to sign the EULA. We're trying to deal realistically with you as the people who are signed on to stupid-ass social media accounts that are manipulating you and doing harm to you. You guys have bought crypto, okay? We're fools, okay? We have to design for the real world, all right? And so this gives us this intermediate step of a new kind of consent, and it's assent. It's assent consent in a sense, because it's a subjective qualia thing that's attached to certain things going on in your brain where you might have a thought or an impulse or a feeling or do something and you'll get this like qualia that's unique to it. Say, oh yeah, this came from that dumbass company. Fuck them, I need to get off this mailing list, you know? Like that, and so we need to develop that because we're not gonna stop the rest of it, and the reason we're not gonna stop the rest of it is you, okay? So we need to develop this other thing. It's all stupid, but we're stupid. We're a stupid species. We do this to ourselves. And we're smart too. We're clever and unwise. We're brilliant and pathetic. We're glorious and infantile. I'm glad we're all those things, but we have to be honest with ourselves and we have to face up to designing really contorted, imperfect technologies as a match to our weirdly contorted, imperfect species. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jaron. We're just going to take a couple minutes here and set the stage up for insightful and heart-rending conversation.
All right, we can get started here. So thanks everybody once again. Hopefully we can get into a lively discussion here. I'll just say if anybody has any thoughts or questions or anything that come up, feel free to interject and jump in. I'd like to start kind of asking the artists of the group. You know, so here at Gray Area, we always find that artists, you know, the reason we do this is because artists help find some of these edge cases and problem areas and nuances in working with these emerging technologies. And so I'll ask, I guess I'll start with you, Amy, like in first of all, in your practice using these brain-computer interfaces, how has that process shaped your idea of your creative practice? And also, what things have you run into that have brought these I'm thinking of like specific things where these neuroprivacy issues have come up, and maybe how have you dealt with those?
So in general, I feel that many artists, and myself included, we're here like a canary in the coal mine. We're here to highlight potential futures that are arising or that are already here and give a feelable engagement with that, a way for us to think about that more. And so the work that I was showing you tonight is over a decade old. And I have since engaged with a lot of different biotech, and biofeedback works. Almost all of my works engage opt-in biofeedback. And the consistent issue I come into over and over is that most of this is not opt-in. As an artist, I can make an installation that's opt-in. That's really nice. But in the real world, it's mostly not opt-in, or it's the illusion of consent, this idea that, you know, students have to use computers to keep up, or athletes or professionals have to use these things to keep up, so we feel that we have to sign away our rights to be able to use this to keep up. So there's some fundamental issues at play that keep coming up over and over. And that's what I see, small issues, but the big issue is the systemic issues that we have to work on.
I don't know, Rhonda?
You know, in the case of the example that I showed you, the first one, I was running that through a federally funded research lab. So there were a lot of protections built in. For the next iteration, we're looking at other types of sensors commercially available. And the privacy issues I'm reading the EULAs. And I think, you know, art becomes a really powerful container to kind of run these processes through to identify the contours. To Jaron's point, in I think it was 2012 or 2013, one of my art pieces was to read all of the EULAs that I signed. And it was like days worth of me just orating. Exactly. And I would never do it otherwise, right? But because I called it an art project, then I actually kind of forced myself into the ritual of
You realize you're the only one.
I think I might be.
Yeah.
You know, and that was, 10, 15, whatever years ago, so I can only imagine how much more expansive. It would probably be months worth of language that I would be orating.
Who's the artist who lived in the cage for the year? And
Xing Shu.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is a kind of parallel sort of torment thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, for those that don't know in the audience, an artist has lived in a cage, also punched a clock every hour for a year. So, I think the arts become these speculative places to perform the tortures of the everyday, to make them visible, to kind of highlight, again, those hard edges.
Yeah, Barbara, do you?
Yeah, I really was excited to hear about Rhonda talking about the surveillance and sort of military side of these things, because a lot of the technology was originally developed for those uses. And I don't know if that's one reason, but most of the biosensors I use in music performance, I just made myself. So there is no company that is funneling data. It's all just me. And whenever someone else plays with an installation I have, I don't save anything. So I really like the ephemerality of that. I think there's something inherently kind of beautiful to that. But yeah, I think it's important, and we also have a way of sort of highlighting by reading out the EULAs, by actually sort of performing the things that are hidden under the surface, that we can highlight those things and actually kind of bring them out into the world. So I'm kind of working on a project where I want to sort of set up my own little surveillance system. I'm going to be a resident artist at Audium, and I guess I don't want to give too much away, but I sort of want that to be the experience that you have to kind of think about what it is like, and be able to sort of see it more clearly, because I think that's important.
So that'll be a piece where the audience is in the headset, or?
I don't know if I'll have headsets, but I will
Okay.
have cameras, heartbeats, galvanic skin response, breath sensors. So you'll get to drive the installation as well.
I actually want to make a follow-up comment to driving the installation, because we've been talking about a lot of the negative effects, but there's a lot of positive use cases too, and I think this is part of our responsibility as well. So one of my favorite use cases is Dawn Cafe in Japan. Have any of you heard of this? It's where people who are bedridden, paraplegic, quadriplegic, seriously ill, can drive robots in a cafe, and the robots serve people. So this gives these people an agency. It gives them a basic wage, some people who need it to pay for their hospital bills. And it also allows them to engage with people. And I went there and I had this experience, and this was what I think is actually some of the most beautiful uses of neurotech that I have ever seen.
Thank you for adding that.
Right on. Kim, maybe for you, you're a company that's been working with artists, you said, for the history of the company. Both what's your process in working with artists, and are there any particular insights that have come from that work, the artists you've worked with, their projects, particularly ones that have sort of found their way back into the product or your, whatever, delivery or rules or,
Yeah, sure. So we are one of the few companies that provide a software development kit that allows developers, creators, builders to be able to hook into the systems and access the data and build on top of it. And so our approach in working with the creators, the builders, the artists is really a partnership. It's really educating them in terms of the technology and what it can do, but really respecting that they're the ones that are the builders. They're the ones that want to create and bring something out. And so we try to be very measured in terms of our influence and really kind of stay and play the part of the educator in terms of the platform and the technology. And thank you for mentioning the use case of being able to really help facilitate the use of the technology for the special needs community. One of my favorite projects is BCI for Kids. It's really bringing technology to patients that have been born into the wheelchairs or have had neurodegenerative conditions that have made it impossible for them to create. And through this technology, they're applying BCI and controlling robotic balls to drag through paint and create these Jackson Pollock-esque paintings. It brings the ability to create to someone that's never created before because they've been born into a wheelchair. It helps in terms of a rehabilitative nature because they're actually thinking about picking something up and controlling it in the same way that we would be picking up a paintbrush and dragging it through paint, whereas most of them are having things done for them, and it gives them this freedom and this autonomy to be creative in a way that their condition never really allowed them to. So I really love that you highlighted that. Thank you.
Gary, when you know, and of course, these special needs cases are the ones where a lot of these neuroprivacy concerns are going to, you know, probably don't mean to be negative. You know, in all this empowerment that's coming, those are the people sort of most vulnerable to these kind of privacy concerns with all this. Gary, I'm wondering in your study research of the quantified self movement, what are some of the sort of norms or rules or consent practices you've found that are good ideas to have in place?
You know, I've dealt mainly with the, we've done some pretty deep research on ethical control of self-driven research, but it hasn't been by choice. It's because people in our community have wanted to do research with their own data, but they've happened to also be, for instance, PhD students or professors, and they've had their data collected under informal circumstances, and now they're actually vulnerable legally and institutionally because they haven't followed the rules, right? Because it's their own data. Some of them have been collecting it for years. So we've deeply engaged there, but in this kind of paradoxical way of the negative side effects of like deeply bureaucratic ethical structures. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is like the main challenge, that ethical challenge kind of, or you know, sort of claim, ethical claim that gets made in the quantified self community is the right to access the data. It's very simple in a way. It's like, can you pull your data out and do something you want with it? And it seems kind of simple. Well, let's just click the download button, right? But actually, once you start to get close, you realize that this process of sensing and tracking is in a technological stack, right? It's very deep. Like at the bottom is like some, you know, analog to digital process, right? And then there's like a battery down there, and the battery, how big the battery is determined by what the sampling rate is. And what the sampling rate is determined by what somebody thinks is relevant, right? And then it goes all the way up to the packaging and the advertising, and it's locked down like at every level. So you might be able to pull one bit of data out of it, but it's kind of like if you have any questions about that data or you want to go one layer down, you're trapped in the stack. And so I think there's been a kind of claim made on these technologies from the quantified self community, which is to open up that stack. And I would say our progress is minimal. So, you know, just to leave that as a challenge, like that stack is pretty locked down still. And
I would say who's
Yeah.
yeah.
The other part of that too is, you know, when I was working with the neuroscientists, it wasn't just in a biolab, it was within a compute center at UC San Diego, because EEG is super noisy. The only way you can really start interpreting the data is with massive compute. And unless you have access to massive compute and you have access to the algorithms that have been trained on these data sets that can find the signal and the noise, then it's almost useless. I would submit that it is useless for most of us to kind of have to sift through the stack, as you say.
Right, and I think there's good reasons, like if you get into the weeds, that people, you find all these good reasons, and I would just say it's a challenge in a way to creativity, like what is the design architecture, and what are the layers, and you know, there was a time when computer networking was pretty locked down, right? Like the actual physical network was locked into the control layer. And then, you know, we ended up with TCP/IP, and we ended up with some open layers in there. And of course, people built closed systems on top of them, but nonetheless, that's a pretty valuable open layer down there at the bottom of our communication technologies, our transmissions. I think there might be something like that in sensing, but I just don't think we're really there yet.
I want to make one comment about that, which is one way to divide the sciences is between the sciences that are reductionist and ones that are fundamentally about complexities that can't be reduced. And so in that latter category, traditionally, there's been medicine and economics. And in both cases, even if you have totally open data, it doesn't necessarily doesn't mean anybody can understand it or use it, even experts or anybody, you know. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And the thing is, computation is in the process of turning from a reductionist science into a complexity science. And so we have this problem that the open source community and in general the maker communities, a lot of places that are used to reductionist principles and technology are still trying to apply them to a situation where they don't work anymore. So the people who make the big AI models don't actually understand them, and it's very unlikely that the systems that are able to either interpret detailed data from the brain or insert detailed functional data into the brain will actually be intelligible to the people who make them. They'll probably be more in that complexity category. So we have to adjust our ideas about use and governance to that. And openness in itself almost becomes a tease. I'm a little concerned when I see AI companies saying, well, we've opened our source, when in fact it's unintelligible and they have a centralized power because of network effect on their servers. So it actually does nothing to mitigate concentration of power, nor does it do anything to empower anybody because it's unintelligible. So it's kind of openness theater at that point. And that's this artifact of this transition to complexity. Computer science hasn't totally made that transition, but we have partially. I suspect some kind of functional deep brain interface of some kind will be fully on the other side of that barrier. And we have to understand that when we think about either cultural responses or regulatory responses or citizen artist group type responses, we have to work with that reality. It doesn't mean, it's not terrible, it doesn't mean we can't do anything, but there's a couple of fallacies to avoid. One is to pretend you can understand things you can't, and we see, like, a great example in medicine is the way Silicon Valley is fascinated with quack medicines all the time, because we're absolutely sure that if we just have access, we're smart enough to understand it. Whereas in fact, that's not how medicine works. It only works with massive studies, you know, and it's hard. But somewhere within a few blocks of here, there are a bunch of tech bros injecting themselves with weird shit right now. That's happening right now, like right here somewhere. And so that's an example of the fallacy to avoid.
Yeah, they're all in the basement right now.
Oh, yeah.
Kim, maybe give us, from the technology side of it, give us all a sense of like where this technology is at right now, what's the state of the art, and maybe like your timeline in terms, you know, we're talking about sort of futuristic, you know, applications of brain-computer interfaces that are kind of, you know, we're hooked up directly, you know, matrix style stuff here, and like what I don't know, where are we at? Where you think, you know, what's the near term, and how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think, you know, technology in terms of BCIs being split up across medical, research, clinical, but we're starting to see consumer-friendly form factors that will allow the technology to scale across everyday users. And when it happens to that, you're going from a highly regulated field and various ethics approvals for clinical or HIPAA-related use cases to now everyday consumers that are signing these EULAs, being able to help them understand exactly what the technology, how it's being built, how we're using it, and making sure that we are, as an organization, designing it with privacy at the foundation in simple terms that people can understand, and educating them in terms of what the technology can do today, in terms of measuring very specific data points to what it can potentially do later on, as in, and you're talking about also the differentiation between invasive and non-invasive BCIs and the different applications and use cases of it, from being able to speak, to being able to control virtual objects, to and smart home, to using it for safety by tracking fatigue, and then optimization, being able to use it for enhancement. So there's so many different layers and use cases, but as the form factor begins to become more consumer friendly and wearable, we're starting to see a shift in that. And then there's also foundation models and looking at how that integrates with AI, and that will shift very quickly.
I think you said you were just down at a conference at CLMR, right? What's the state of the sort of industry collaboration around this stuff and these frameworks and kind of like norms or whatever? I mean, I'm sure it's an active conversation, but is there anything that's like being just, like developed out of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of groups that want to be able to coalesce around best practices, potentially building out industry scorecards or neuroethics charters for organizations. From an industry standpoint, I can say this for a lot of my colleagues that are building in this same space, we want to be a part of the dialogue. We want to be transparent in terms of how we're developing the technology because we are still very early stages. But there's this line between ensuring that the data privacy and rights, and then also trying to build frameworks for future technology and use cases and capabilities, and then stifling the innovation and stifling the ability to be able to really develop technology that could bring good and could have positive impact. And so there's a lot of kind of mediation and voices and, contention around wanting to protect all of that.
Maybe a question for anybody that knows what the status of the sort of like lobbying effort or like efforts or like legislation creation or anything around these topics is. Are we like totally far behind? Or
it's state by state. California was unsurprisingly one of the first in 2024. And I think that there's like a handful, maybe 12 other states. And, there's different ways that legislation is being passed, and it's piecemeal, and I'm sure it's complicated for you all to manage. So one is, control of your own data. That's a puzzle piece. The second is the kind of consent, to opt in, the necessary consent opt in. The other is interpretability, right? So can we retain enough data so that it can be future forward and useful in the future while removing, identifiable features for each of the users? I don't think that that's going to be possible. Our brain waves are more unique to us and less fungible than our thumbprints. So this is where the tension between an uninterpretable data set that it feels almost valueless without the interpretability layer, and the interpretability layer being a kind of a controlled strata, but is not necessarily the most valuable in the future. The valuable data is that raw data so that you could start creating fingerprints of behavioral sets. This is where, kind of the future crime prevention and all of, the scary sci-fi stuff starts coming into play. But
So who wants that?
Who wants that?
Who wants that? Like,
Oracle, Larry Ellison wants that.
Why does he want it?
This has been in play for a long time, though,
But
too.
is it a fantasy? Like, I'm just curious. I mean, I think it's very scary.
Part of it for him, I think,
he has
is
a lot
fantasy.
of fantasies.
And I think he's surrounded himself
with
a
other
lot
people.
of
Exactly.
And they have, enough money to throw at it so that it is not an impossibility. So this is where I get a little bit worried, is that, in the past, it was too much of a technical challenge to deploy, but we're getting very, very close to that no longer being the case. And I think, getting ahead of it at the federal level so that it's easier for tech to develop consistently, getting it ahead of it at the FDA level too, because right now they're preventing you all from doing a lot of the kind of advancements in medicine, right? They kind of have to be categorized as wellness devices to be able to be sold, I think. Is that true? I don't know, you're the expert.
There's different layers of EEG and neurotech, and some of it is passing FDA approval for various treatments, looking at mental wellness, looking at sleep, and then there are a faction of companies that are looking at providing wearable devices for wellness and health.
I want to comment, this is, I think, a great place too where artists come into play, because a lot of times these innovations, they have to go through all these guidelines, but the artist can bring to awareness what this technology can do, all these things that it can do. So how it can be used for healing with the questions in it. So it kind of goes full circle back to that. As artists, we're independent researchers, a lot of us. I don't have to report to anybody. So I can still continue to experiment and share these results.
I think that's one of the big lessons from quantified self for us, was that like when we started in like 2009, there were huge fantasies. There was going to be a digital twin, and you were going to be able to kind of test out treatments on your digital twin, and like the fantasies were very powerful, and there was a lot of money behind them and a lot of fear also, and almost none of them happened. Like, in fact, I could say pretty much none of them happened. And in the meantime, the artists who were involved and the individuals learned incredible things, but they were very private learnings, right? Like one person learned something that was almost barely communicable, except at this meta level of, hey, it's possible to learn, which is a very good lesson to learn. And that was really interesting, and I just wonder if maybe some of this neurotech is the same. Like, there's these super powerful fantasies, and of course they're driving the people who profit from big fantasies, but there might be something else happening that's like almost impossible to see. I mean, except if you're an artist.
Both things are true,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's the way to move forward, is to hold both the great promise, but also, you know, what it seems almost inevitable and likely to happen if we don't make massive changes to the way that we regulate both our private personal data or medical data and, you know, behavioral, because there are already digital twins. We already have digital twins. They're highly valuable. Look at the largest companies, the most valuable companies. They're selling our digital twins. So, you know, when we start getting, I think, into trouble is when our digital twin when we no longer have control over it, we can't see it, we don't know how it's operating, and then when it comes back to kind of haunt our biological body, which is what is about to happen and what the kind of fantasies of these, you know, tech oligarchs
I'll share. I made a piece on this called Echoes from the Valley of Existence, and it had a digital twin. It was about afterlife. So Japanese commissioned me to do a piece on afterlife 100 years or more in the future. And I immediately thought of our biological data, like our DNA, all these things we're leaving, and our digital data. And so the piece had opt-in, digital twin engagement. You could take pictures and images or leave your DNA in an archive that's now on the moon. So it was really thinking about, what are you leaving for the future? Really, the artwork really started with, do you want to do this, yes or no? Would you leave one or the other? Why or why not? What story is that going to tell about you after you pass away?
I'm going to change tracks here a little bit and talk about the sort of art and aesthetics side of it. And I think we'll open it up for questions here in just a minute. So prepare yourselves, your queries. And for those watching out there at home, I believe we have somebody monitoring the situation on the chat. And so feel free to type in your questions for our illustrious guests. Maybe, I guess first question, well, actually I'll take a step back. For those who are educators, how are these, have you noticed anything particular about how these issues are being thought about by like the students and younger, you know, like what are these concerns about privacy, being online? I don't know if the BCI stuff comes into it or not, but what are you seeing?
I teach, and, you know, 2015, 2016, I was teaching at Stanford, and I talk about digital privacy, and the students are like, why do you care? You know, like, what are you talking about? Like, who cares if they have, you know? And that's changed for sure. And I think a lot of it has to do, you know, I'm now teaching at San Jose State. It's, you know, first generation students. They're all terrified of, you know, this kind of surveillance state at this point for lots of different reasons. And so they've kind of pulled themselves back from Web 2 and into the cozy web. So my colleague Andrew Blanton wrote essentially kind of a parallel to Discord. So it's all ours. We own the data. We're getting it kind of passed through all the accessibility rights so that we can use it kind of officially within the university. So our students are very tech forward, and they want to be online, but they want to be online with each other in consensual domains.
Yeah, I think in music, actually, a lot of my students are almost ahead of me, and at this point, I feel like I have to make sure that I keep up, because I think the way that they think about things is actually very happy. They're all very critical. They're all very aware. And a lot of the work that they're making in my class, I teach a class called Composer Performer. They can make a piece about whatever they want. A lot of them, well, a couple of them do address social media use and how it actually, you know, divides and has a lack of community when, you know, in fact, music, the main role of it is to bring people together and share space and time. So I'm actually really happy that there's a dialogue now and that there's like just much more awareness, and I feel like I'm learning a lot from my students about this, and we're kind of going through it together because I don't think there is like a clear answer and path. So yeah, I would say that's why I'm happy to be in education, because I keep learning about this stuff.
And I think in self-research practice, you see the same thing. Like, a lot of people are doing self-research on refusing social media, on being aware. You know, just one that comes to mind is somebody who's using HRV to kind of indicate when, well, actually, he did a wonderful project where it showed that he got on social media. He thought social media was stressing him out, but he learned from his HRV data that social media was a response to stress. So he would hit a stressful moment in his workday, and then social media would be, but then it would be kind of a feedback loop. And so I think this critical awareness of like the burden, the everyday torment, as you put it, that's very good. I think this is really on people's minds.
Let's imagine a hypothetical future where we have robust brain-computer interfaces that can kind of bypass our normal sensory inputs the way that we're engaging in the world right now. Maybe this is a good one for Jaron. When we're in like post-symbolic communication, does art still exist? What do we have?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to go, if we survive, it'll be through a period of extreme chaos. And in chaos, there's always hope.
Is this not it? I don't.
No, this is not it. I think it's going to get, get a little more crazy, actually. Maybe not, you know. What makes reality real is that it's not predictable, so I'm not going to claim to have it down. But, you know, it certainly seems like it's going to get a little nuttier. And I think art's going to be redefined as something more precious and mystical. I think there's going to be more and more of a romantic, mystical ideal that people seek, affirming the reality of internal experience and the reality that people are something beyond robotic actuators that belong to a tech company. I think there's going to be a more and more kind of just personal, smelly, indecipherable, uncopyable trend in art. I think there's going to be a lot of cryptic and obscure art. I think there's going to be a lot of acoustic instruments and a lot of messy physicality. A lot of jewelry. And I found making it helps, you know, and I think other people are going to start finding that too. I think there's going to be some kind of a reckoning of a conflict of worldviews between the kind of spectrum-y supremacism that's popular now and some kind of response to it that's forming. I think the great challenge is going to be, like, it's funny, like, I try to spend as much time as I can with high schoolers and undergraduates, and for a long time, it seemed like they were getting darker and darker and darker, and then it seemed like it turned around, like, maybe just a few years ago, I felt like there was kind of a rebound, and they were kind of coming, and now what I'm seeing this year is actually this whole other wave, where they're all having relationships with bots that end up disappointing them, and they're not forming relationships with each other to the degree that I think would be considered normal in earlier cohorts, you know? And so that's like the new thing I'm really worried about. And so I have a bunch of friends who study that and try to do population studies, but it's also new that we don't really know a lot about it. And it's just like any of the rest of the stuff. There are people who say, oh, no, it's great. And for their special needs ones who will need it because they can't handle a regular relationship or they'll, whatever. There's like the same discussion always repeats around these things. But at the end of the day, the new challenge for this cohort is, can they rediscover each other? And that's going to be an interesting challenge. I think one of the hardest things about being human is that other humans are always annoying. And no, it's true. That's why politics is hard. If it weren't for that, politics would be easy, right? And that's why art is hard, and that's why all this stuff is hard. And so the question is, will they find enough value in each other as opposed to the very easy simulated boy and girlfriends and all that? Will they find enough value to tolerate the annoyances of real people? And I think that's in a way the great drama of the next few years. But that's only the beginning. Then beyond that, we have many more chapters. But that's the chapter we're entering right now.
Anybody else on that? No.
I actually find that this year's cohort is more kind of communal facing than internal facing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the age at which they were when they stayed home for, during lockdown. So I may be a little bit more hopeful, but this could also be
I'm not unhopeful. Yeah. I'm just trying to identify where hope is needed, I suppose.
I'm hopeful in different places, I suppose. Then, yeah. Or I'm distrustful or worried about different things, I think, at this stage. Kids are all right.
Kim, do you have it?
A lot of the artists that we've had the good fortune to collaborate with have been fearless about exploring the uncomfortable and really wanting to surface things that drive culture and force policy and law to recognize. And there's all this conversation about AI, but listening to the work that Barbara and the other artists on the panel are doing, I feel like it's really driving towards a human intelligence and understanding what that human experience is and how can you build on that and how can you bring that individual and that human experience in the loop. And that's fascinating, and that's not something that I don't see any of you shying away from.
I would add that to that too. Also the non-human experience. This is something I'm deeply fascinated with. So instead of moving away from other humans in this, how can we have an experience of knowing someone more if we have some kind of way of understanding them? Or what if we can have the sensations of the emotional state of dolphins or a sea like a bug? how could this actually bring us to a greater state of experiencing the world? And this is another arena that I can imagine that art will flourish within the environment. So I do see also coming out of the environment being very analog, but also something within the environment that's going to be totally new to offer us experiences that are deeper and beyond what it means to be human, and also to deeply connect with other humans.
There's something that I think is important to say here, which is there's the micro and there's the macro. And on a macro level, particularly in the Bay Area, a lot of times we interact with very bright kids who have a lot of resources and whatnot. But at the macro level, what we see in political trends worldwide is perhaps not going in the right direction. And so I want to talk about the macro level for a second. That's kind of, I would prefer not to go there, but I've just found one has to. And so there's a very interesting opportunity now, and I really want to say this specifically to this Bay Area audience and to all of you, which is that the present administration in the U.S. would not be there without the evangelicals and the Catholic conservatives. They are the vote. They're very disappointed. They feel that they voted in what they thought would be the government of their dreams, and instead they got a batch of super rich tech bros who don't even believe in the soul or humans or relationships or love or families or anything, and just want to turn us all into robots and replace humans with robots or something. There's a moment of potential outreach here on a massive scale, and I think the ball's in our court to reach out for them and not be snobby towards them at this point. I've been spending a lot of time with conservative evangelicals. I got to stay inside the Vatican, which is amazing, and Muslims too, all over the world. And the conservative religious people are miles away from positions that I can even tolerate about bodily autonomy for women and sexual identity choices, and there are all these things that are incredibly important to me that they are just not there, okay? But there's this commonality, and to make progress culturally and politically, we have to be able to find common ground. This is the annoyance we must tolerate to survive, and I think there's an incredible opportunity for outreach from the super smart, enlightened Bay Area to these communities to find common ground in celebrating humanity. And I think that is the path to national reconciliation. That's a path that's open to us now that was not before. That's a little bit of hope in chaos, and we need to get over ourselves and seize it.
I think connecting those two thoughts, right? Thinking about this burgeoning neuro technology as an empathy-making device, right? If I can see myself in another or feel myself in another, then it might get us a step closer to that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, this idea of using technology for empathy, oh gosh, if any of you are familiar with what I was doing in my rhetoric of a half century ago, I was so all over that idea, and
I think it's recoverable.
What?
I think it's recoverable. I'm an optimist.
Here's my suggestion is to leave it. It's up to you, of course, but I think using technology to improve humanity it's tricky because it creates a sort of a narrows of trade or a point of control where somebody can get power over the humanity that might be improved. It's a very perilous move, and I'm not saying never, but I think maybe it's worth putting that stuff on the back burner for a minute and concentrating on just finding some commonality for basics. I still believe in it. I mean, a lot of this, oh my God, you have no idea how much, I really explored that world very intensely. And by the way, for what it's worth, I used to do performances with the AG. I had AG controlling orchestra scores, and so I've done, like, I've been in that world too. But the thing is, I think our priority, like, what we need to do to survive, our path to survival is to find a dialogue of commonality around something precious about humanity that we all agree is worth defending. And that's what, we have to do that with everybody. And technologies for empathy can only be understood in the context of politics and human aggression, unfortunately, because we have to be realistic about who we really are. And it's a hard lesson. I wish I didn't know. I would prefer not to have gone through it. But the thing, I just think there's a danger of being, in a way, too idealistic and becoming impractical. And that kind of happened in Silicon Valley, actually.
I just would be wary of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not going to only be through technology that we find these common grounds. And it certainly cannot be only through technology. But I do think as an initial outreach, how I don't know that many evangelicals.
You need to. It's
Are there
urgent. I
some
mean,
here?
it's seriously urgent. I'm not
This is
joking.
what I'm saying is, like, I do think
Like,
that
I think you have to treat it as
let's
a
go
mission.
find.
I'm really
let's
serious.
go find each other. But I'm not going to find them in my daily
you
life.
drive east for an hour.
Drive east for an hour.
Yeah, they're there.
Like Livermore?
Sure. You can, okay, I know, all right, get ready for this. You can go over the Altamont Pass into the valley. Oh my God, there's so many. They're there.
I'll just knock on the door.
You did? No, I'm serious. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, let's road trip.
Would you like to wear my EEG?
Let's get a bus.
You can be an octopus.
Wait, what?
At last.
That's my invitation.
You can be an octopus?
Yeah, and in my EEG.
So, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Do you know about homuncular flexibility in the history of VR and the whole, yeah, I mean, been an octopus.
Jaron,
Yeah.
what's your job title?
Oh yeah, well my job title is I'm at Microsoft. I'm the Prime Unifying Scientist, which is the PUS part of Octopus, Office of Chief Technology Officer, Prime Unifying Scientist. Yes, I am. But no, I've done a lot of research with octopi. I used to go out on boats and run little robots in the Monterey Bay where there's incredibly deep habitats with them. And
bodily
I love them, and I've trained them, and they're great, and cuttlefish even more so. But no, the thing about them is they have display. Some of the species have displays on their skin, so they have a visible visual cortex. So in that case, we have a species where we actually can look into what they're thinking, and they're incredibly. The tragic thing with them is that they don't have childhoods. The parents never know the kids, and so they can't pass anything along. So they're brilliant. They're incredible. They have brain tentacle coordination. They're fundamentally as smart as us, I think, but because they don't have culture, because they don't have generational connection. So I used to say, an octopus with generational connection might be like a human with advanced VR, where we could also have display skin and all that, and morph ourselves into anything and experience anything. Oh my God, I love all that stuff. I love it. But right now, the species is on the verge of absolutely wiping itself out, and let's just make it through this period, and then we'll have time. We'll have time to be octopi or octopuses or whatever it is, and we can see if we can really see through each other's eyes and all of that. I love that. But I think that might take centuries, and it should. Like that's really great stuff. And but we got to make it through this period. And the way we make it through is by connecting with the people who annoy us.
So maybe that's as good a time as any to open it up to questions from beyond the stage anyone that cares to annoy Jaron,
I'm easy to annoy. I'm very irritable. I'm
we're
overly
ready.
sensitive.
Any evangelicals out there, we'll prioritize you. Let's start here.
So the EU is on the verge of adopting like 3 principles of neuroprivacy. Could we talk about, are any folks familiar with them, and do they form a model that the US could use or US states could use?
I actually couldn't hear you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I was saying that the EU is about to adopt 3 standards for neuroprivacy. And I was kind of asking, could you compare those to the ones that the US states are adopting, and are they a model that could be used at the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, have you ever been to an EU policy meeting? Your general liveliness and good skin tone already told me the answer that you had not. Oh my God, look, I hope they're great. I hope they're great, but Brussels is like this giant planetary anesthetic. It's like, oh my God. Just even thinking about the EU and neuroprivacy regulations. Oh. Anyway, no, please, go ahead.
It's a capacity to sit with those that annoy you, right?
I've done it. I did it for decades. I still do. I do it. I still have to vent a little. I have to vent a little.
The EU is an empathy machine.
What?
So the EU is an empathy machine.
Well, you know, it's such an interesting contrast to go back and forth between that setting and this setting. And they have lots and lots of Trumpy stuff going on too, and lots of, I mean, they really do. But they do have, I guess I'm kind of glad we're both here in a way. I think the contrast has been really helpful to look back and forth. A lot of what holds our tech together is the communitarian ideas of Europe. You know, without them, we wouldn't have, I don't know, Linux or the web or all kinds of things. That sensibility has led to interstitial layers between our stuff that we wouldn't be able to do anything without. You know, so. Maybe I don't know, it's kind of an interesting question, like whether in the future, do we seek a place where there are these big camps that are different so we have a bit of broad variety, or do we want more unity? I don't know. But anyway, I haven't seen I personally have not seen the EU neuroprivacy principles. I hope they're good. Have you seen them?
No.
Huh?
Do you want to, you said there were 3, do you want to? 5.
5.
Okay, so the principles are cognitive liberty, the freedom of a person to decide whether the brain activity and mental processes can be recorded or modulated or not. Mental privacy, the freedom and capacity of a person to conceal their mental information and prevent non-consented intrusion into the cognitive domain. Mental integrity, the prohibition of non-consensual harmful modulation of a person's neural activity. Psychological continuity, the right to preserve one's personal identity and continuity of one's mental life. And then fair access, the ability to ensure the benefits of improvements to sensory and mental capacity through neurotechnology are distributed justly in the population.
I would add to that liability. So what is the liability if you broach these principles? And I think one of the areas that the US state laws are really weak is the liability concern. And I think we have to make it hurt. Yeah, so federal law trumps the state law when it comes to, this kind of like invasive sharing of data, and that was the Section 702 kind of, but if we can write in, especially in California, legislation that has teeth for the liability concerns, then I think we can set precedent and hopefully allow a path for the other states who are considering these laws right now.
I mean, my profound concern about the principles as you read them is consent, because That's why I was trying to make such a fuss. I hope I didn't offend anybody, but you will all consent. So will everybody in Europe. You know, consent. There has to be some better concept than consent for things this deep, because there will be services you want, and then you'll consent. And then the problem is that there's no way. That's why I was getting to all this technology about qualia for artificial stuff. There has to be some way of managing this that's not based on the concept of consent, because consent, unfortunately, it's always too broad. It's always done without foresight because you don't know what's going to happen, and it's just not the right concept. But and then go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's important for organizations and companies to build not just consent at the entry point, but continual consent and education in terms of, oh, can we use this data in this context or with this partner? And you have to be able to continually opt into allowing that or opting out of that at every step of the way.
But okay, can I just be really blunt? What's going to happen is that in an attempt to do that, there'll be some complicated set of further on things that users won't understand, but they'll be too complex for your small company to do, so you're going to have to get bought by a big one in order to even stay in, because otherwise you won't be able to afford to. And that was the effect of the GDPR. So this type of thing, it's very well, the intention is fabulous, but that's the likely effect, because we've just seen it too many times already. Anyway, okay.
Well,
I hope
what would have to
I wanna be
shift
wrong.
at the like systemic level for this?
The word liability was mentioned, and I just want to hear more about that, because I think liability is like actually maybe the key that unlocks.
I meant it in the sense of what happens if you broach data, if you take the data, if
Or
you
what
use
happens
it
if you
illegally.
actually harm somebody. I
Yeah,
think there's kind of systemic harms, and there's what does it do to society, and how does it change our politics. But there's a wonderful historian of science, Andreas Killen, and if you want to see brain scientists hurting people, you should read his account of brain science in mid-century, because the brain scientists really hurt a lot of people, and they hurt them very badly, and so did the tobacco companies, and so have the social media companies. And I think there's something a blunt instrument, maybe these bureaucratic instruments are almost like a little bit too tuned, but the blunt instrument of like, if you really hurt somebody, then you ought to be held accountable. And I don't mean hurt them in this subtle way of like, you know, I'm kind of, I used to read a lot, now I don't read so much anymore, and I feel a little more anxious. I mean like really hurting somebody, like causing them to commit suicide, or causing them to commit or encouraging them, or playing a role in their committing a violent act, or, you know, these are things that actually are happening already, and maybe there's something in there that could unlock some of this away from like the EULAs, which obviously are not protecting us.
I just want to say, so you might wonder, like, I speak as I do, and yet I'm a Microsoft top scientist. How's that possible? It's because I negotiated a relationship with them where I'm encouraged to speak my mind so long as it's clear I'm not speaking for them, which I think is to their credit. But in that context, let me say, the problem is that the tech titans are pseudo-governmental and there is no consequence that's ever existed since when? I mean, not in decades. There's been no consequence that's actually moderated tech companies very much. We just had the first legal judgment for a suicide from a AI bot very recently, in the last week or two, and will that turn into thing? I mean, the problem is that these are pseudo-governmental. They're so central because of the power of network effects over digital networks. When you have low friction networks, they tend to amplify a central node, and so these things are so powerful that there's not really a way to maintain society and punish them very much. You can do a little bit, but not a lot. So could Meta really have been broken up? No, you know, that would be like this gigantic thing. And so right now we don't have that. We don't have a mechanism that is real, that's plausible. It's plausible the EU could kick some out. China did it. I mean, China proved you can. China just said, all of you West Coast, giant platforms, we're just going to ban you, and they did. They're an authoritarian government, but they did it. And they said, no, we'll just make our own stuff just like it. And, and then we'll foist our stuff on them, and they did that. But they proved it's possible, so maybe the EU could do that. I think it might be harder in the EU than in China. But we have to solve this problem. I don't think it's healthy to have these pseudo-government things that have none of the responsibility or accountability or process of government at all that tend to. There's this whole crazy sequence of events that led to this idea of the unitary founder running everything, and that's a whole other really interesting history, but this idea, it makes them insane. I mean, like, we've watched maybe somewhat eccentric, but reasonable people who win these things turn into like these kind of dangerous, nutty people over and over again. And so we have an absolutely unviable system. I don't know how we get out of it. We absolutely have to.
I think the liability is super important. It also implies that it's like at the end. Something's already happened at that point. So how do we build in this architecture from the beginning is really the fundamental question here. How do we restructure these systems? Because what we see over and over, especially here, is these big companies that just do as much as they can, get away with as much as they can, so they get sued so hard. And then they still keep doing it because they've already made their money. So at that point, the liability, yeah, they get sued, they have to pay for it, but who's really paying the price? And I think that actually goes to a lot of your points. So how do we build in this architecture, this ethical architecture initially, so we don't get to the point that we need to use the liability?
Well, the thing is that all systems that rely on complexity need more and more data and more compute. And that's also a crazy thing. Like, right now, we're prioritizing this giant build of data centers that is really threatening the climate and a lot of people who live close to them, sort of to make fake girlfriends for people and stuff. I mean, it's really weird. But in order to process data from the brain, it's probably going to be a big data thing. It might not be. I mean, that's the thing, is it's science, and we don't really know yet. It might be that we can pluck out and insert a few simple pieces of information, and that's actually happened in some lab experiments with animals. So there might be a lot to do that's not a complexity play, but probably it will be. And as soon as it's complexity, then there's enormous advantage to whoever can have the biggest of whatever it is, and then it gets into this contest to make the biggest empire, and oh God, I don't want to do that again with our brains. But anyway, that's the failure mode that could happen.
Well, and even if it's simple, it still could be copied. How many times is it going to be copied? How many times is it going to be saved over and over again and not used? And there's that aspect of the data too.
Maybe we have another question here.
For Jaron and probably Kim. So I'm a privacy lawyer, so I'm very interested in privacy by design, which is kind of what we're talking about here with liability being at the afterthought, and how do we get ahead of that and solve at the root. And since we're talking about hardware specific to neurotechnology, that presents unique challenges and opportunities to embed privacy by design. So I loved hearing about the natural gas aspect that you mentioned, Jaron, but I'm curious other examples of how you're thinking about privacy by design in this context.
Well, this is, it's not just a new problem, but we don't really have the science yet. We're starting to get peaks of it, but we don't really know what we're dealing with yet. Because I think the important part of this is going to emerge as the interfaces improve. And I don't mean to insult the EEG. It's great, but I'm just saying there's much more detailed techniques coming that are already somewhat demonstrated, and some of them are non-invasive even. There's a lot of really interesting work about how to get data in and out of deeper parts of the brain. And I might have a bias against EEG because of my hair. I don't know. But I've struggled with it so much. But so we really don't know yet. We don't know how much it'll be a science of complexity or reduction. There's so many basic questions that are still emerging. But at UC Berkeley 20 years ago, people were able to reconstruct what somebody was seeing just from brain signals, right? So we actually have already done quite an amazing amount. And and there's recently been incredible work of that kind with flies and rodents and all the, the laboratory creatures, and it ought to transfer. I mean, this is all just, so anyway, to answer your question, there are many other ideas. But I don't, I kind of did my best to give a peek at sort of the style of thinking rather than really formulate things. By the way, was I right that that was Learned Hand? Do you know? It was? Okay. It was about cameras. Oh, that's right. It was about cameras on the street. 1800 something. Wow, thank you. God, I just had that memory while I was talking, and I was trying to put it together. If I had the neural scanner of the future, I would have had it right away, right? It would have been like, Claude tells you it's Learned Hand. Anyway. It might have been Breyer. But see, I'm trusting you as a reliable source now. Okay. Anyway.
There's somebody back there.
Yeah, and we have, I'm going to come back there. We have one from the Network Beyond, which is, has anyone worked with systems that can influence the brain without direct electrical stimulation, like hormones or gut microbiome? Was the question from the...
I have not.
The answer from the panel is no. We're going to go back here.
I mean, I experiment on myself.
All right.
Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. My name is Lauren. I work with a medical BCI startup, and I also co-founded a neurosecurity research institute that presented this last week at ISILAMAR, which is the first technical defense of neurosecurity. So we basically feel that there's been a lot of discourse about these topics for a long time, but no one has built a complete threat taxonomy for exactly how people can be attacked with these kinds of devices. We think everything is already happening. The William Gibson quote, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet." We think that for BCI, this is not true. We think it's already here. Almost everyone has a smartphone, which we would consider a consumer BCI device. A few of you alluded to some really beautiful visions for what people could be doing with technology in a generative way. Someone mentioned the cozy internet and the future of art and how artists could be engaging with this technology. So I'm curious, next year, 5 years, 10 years, what's one thing on your wish list for BCI? Magic wand question, doesn't have to feel feasible in this moment, but I'm just curious if you can add more to that.
I can share a general wish that I really hope would govern BCI and a lot of the sensing technologies, which is that the control layer or the mixing zone comes much closer to the person. And so that the models, are made by people who are really good at making models, and those are kind of generic models, and they might predict some generic things like, your likelihood to purchase a product or whatever, like they're already doing, right? But the real personal questions, I think we should be able to bring the model to the data, right? Like that the model should be available and we should be able to compute with it using our own data without exposing the data. And I think there are already, architectures for this, but they're kind of, they're not really available to us quite yet. But I think that's like as a very general wish, like if I really push myself 10 years out, I can use these models on my own data, but I don't have to expose the data to do it.
I mean, this is a conundrum because the models come from data in the first place, and this is why talking about privacy as a blockage of data isn't sustainable or, I mean, sometimes, of course, that's exactly what you should do, but in general, in order for the model to exist, somebody has to, and then there's this potential for social inequality where it comes from people who are less able to say no or something like that, and that also leads to a world that's not really desirable. So it is a little tricky, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that these questions kind of fold in on themselves and become more complicated than we want them to be. And that's why I was kind of struggling for the right not to be fucked with as opposed to the right to not have your data exposed. Even though that's quite difficult, I think it's closer to something that could become a longer term definition. I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't know I wish I could give you like some magic formula, but I just, at some point somebody has to be sharing data for this model to even exist that you don't want your data to be exposed when you use. And so therefore there's a question, there's a social question there. And if we weren't in a world of giant tech monopolies, that question would be maybe of a different nature, but and maybe the question will become easier if we enter into a different power structure about this stuff. But it doesn't mean it'll go away, it'll still be there.
It's so tricky, right? Like, I want the world to exist within which I can play and be a cozy octopus with my headset on, interfacing with a cozy flower and communing deeply. I think that there's so much potential and so much possibility. And as an artist, I would love it if I could think solely about the artwork that I'm making and not the political and economic reality outside of it. In terms of the liability, I suggest that we bring back public shaming. And there are people behind these corporations, and maybe we should just shame them, tomatoes in the stock or something, I don't know.
Are they capable of being shamed?
I think that would do it.
Yes.
I think that would totally do it.
Well, there has to be some way that shame isn't monetized in order for it to be legitimate. And right now it's so monetized that it's lost its...
Well, it's internal. Let's bring back the public
it's lost
performance
its integrity.
of shame.
Well, we could have little flying neurodrones that land on people and inject shame into their heads.
Shame.
Yeah.
I feel like despite all the technology and the advancements, we still know so little about the human brain. And our medical system is set up and the technology is set up so that we know more about how many steps we've taken throughout the day than the changing neural dynamics of our brain. And it's one of the most important organs that helps us define who we are, how we're going to interact with people, and we know so little. We want to be able to empower people to understand, to be able to access that, to have agency over how they can utilize that, how other people might benefit or not benefit from that. And we want that to be something that everybody can access equally, and we want the technology to be developed in a way that represents the many brains in the room, not just the one. But that comes with a heavy burden as a developer, as a builder of the technology. And so being on this panel and being able to share our perspective and what we want to do, no matter how naive that might seem at the moment, but that's the intention.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If I can just add, I think my idealistic view would be that in a sense we use community and gathering in person together as a way to explore different forms of technology. I think language is technology. the ways that we interact with each other is all a way that we organize. And I think a lot of what we're talking about is how do we organize ourselves and how do we actually communicate. And understanding how our brains work is we don't know so much. I'm so glad you mentioned that. There's so much we don't know about our entire perceptual system, and I don't know that a model can necessarily capture all of that information. So one hope would maybe be that if there's interest in understanding our brains, that we have gatherings, we come together, we hack, we learn about the data, and we try it out ourselves together. So that would be one idea for it.
And we have, I think this will probably be our penultimate question here.
Thanks. I want to tease out a tension I see in a lot of the discussion and ask you to respond to it. So going back to this idea of consent and how that has failed, particularly in the context of GDPR, it seems that, going back also to a point that you made, Jaron, how we build our legislation, our regulation, our approach to this will depend on our concept of human psychology. What are humans about? And when we rely on this old Enlightenment liberal concept of consent, we implicitly say humans know what's best for them, right? Humans can make good decisions. So the whole regulatory concept is going to be based on empowering humans to make the decisions. However, in reality, we see that humans make bad decisions, but we're very sort of wedded to this liberal romantic ideal that we struggle to accept that reality and figure out what to do with it. But if we take this idea seriously, that maybe humans won't know what's good for them and will give away their rights and then it will all be a fuck up, the alternative might be some sort of benevolent paternalism, right? That we have some nexus of power outside on individual choice and we'll tell humans you can't sell that data, right? Or companies cannot do that to you. But Jaron, that goes against another point you made, and there lies the tension, which is when you have this outside locus of power and benevolent paternalism, that becomes open to adversarial capture, right? Becomes open to dictatorial abuse. So do you see this tension? Would you agree? If so, what concept of human psychology should we lean on? The liberal agency-based choice celebrating version, or the more utilitarian welfare paternalistic, we want you to be safe from harm version? And what does that mean in terms of actual legislation we enact?
Okay. First, I do want to say, I didn't say that the concept of consent was a total failure in the GDPR. All I said was that there were a lot of side effects and the whole thing was much more complicated. And so I don't want to, I'm not that dark, okay? I just want
Many people have said that, right? Even the things that you click on to agree to everything.
Wait, what?
I mean, many people have said that, not necessarily you.
Well, okay, that's fair enough. So I think the problem, I mean, you've brought up something very important, which is what kind of a sense of humanity are we working with to try to use Valley speak, to optimize for, right? And my favorite phrase in the American founding documents is the pursuit of happiness, because what it does is instead of trying to nail it, it just kind of creates this space. There's like a little mystery space. Like, we don't say what happiness is. We don't say how you get it. We just say you can pursue it, okay? I think that's a very smart little turn of phrase. I'm not sure if that was Jefferson or who, but whoever did that had their act together. What? Was that Adams? Love this audience. Oh, right, that was a rewrite. I remember that's in, what's his name's book about that. But anyway, okay, so I love that. I love that. And these were a bunch of people trying to write this thing who were trying to find some kind of consensus document with great difficulty, and sometimes with a bit of laziness and absenteeism too. So it's sort of a miracle this thing happened. But I love that turn of phrase. And I think something like that, I think we need to have something that isn't too explicit about how people should be, how people are, what people want. The idea I was floating earlier when I was talking of like to outlaw predictability, I think is a start. Outlawing predictability does create this space, right? And what one hopes is that if you outlaw predictability in algorithmic interactions with people, then you also, in a sense, would foster diversity in what those people are like as a natural consequence. And then there would be like this bouquet of different kinds of people with different psychologies. And that seems like the right outcome. So I think this is going to be an art of what not to say. Okay, and this is actually at the core of the EU process problem, is that they actually try to say stuff that can't be said. And that's where I think the GDPR got confused by trying to really mark down, saying like, this is the line we're laying down, but then it just gets so complicated, but except there's this exception, then you have to do this, and you have to have that consent, and there's this consent, but then there's this other one. And that's, you end up in this sort of hell when you try to say what you really can't say. You know, and so we have to learn how to speak around voids when we do this, and I think that's going to be the art. And of course, that's not what we want. We want to nail it because we're the smartest generation that ever lived, and we're going to lay it down and just get it for everybody. But we have to resist that.
I'd also suggest that that tension that you've identified might be alleviated. We just let people fuck up. Let them make the bad decision. I think I've learned so much in my life through my bad decisions, and I wouldn't want to be wrapped in bubble wrap. But we need to know what the decision is, right? So we can't hide parts of the truth or give you only a little bit, a little tease. I think trusting each other, trusting one another, and trusting ourselves will go a long way.
And I think we got our last question here.
I love the idea that artists have an important role in preparing us moving forward. I wonder if we could take a moment to give artists, and maybe everybody, a scorecard as how we did preparing us for our current Web 2.0 attention or privacy crisis. How do we do? What can we learn from that going forward?
I think we need an alternative to capitalism. It doesn't work. It's not healthy. It's broken. So I think what we've learned is that you can start out by trying to make a kind of squirmy, like dating ranking website that like quickly turns into, you know, government surveillance in 10 years really quickly. So let's not turn our beautiful brainwave experiments into that same thing. And I think there has to be a force motivating us other than accumulation of power and wealth.
I think the artists are doing amazing. There's a lot of artists doing really powerful stuff, but we're up against some really big forces. Like the rest of us in the audience, whatever your profession is, we can try as hard as we want, but we're up against some really major forces. So activities like this, coming together, trying to figure out how we could work together towards these goals helps move the dial forward a little bit, move the needle forward a little bit, but there's a lot of artists that are doing amazing work and trying really hard. And if they touch 10 people, 20 people, 200 people, they've done their job.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up there. Yeah, everybody give a huge round of applause for our speakers. Secondly, a continued round of applause for Kim and EMOTIV for being our technology partner on this event. You know, if there's, San Francisco should be able to own this conversation about art and technology, and to do that, we need the technology companies to support, and so the ones that do, we should valorize and give a round of applause, so thank you. Thirdly, let's give a round of applause for Anastasia Chernysheva. This was her concept and curation and event, and it's gone great. There's She also organizes and runs a book club called the Cybersyntics Book Club that happens here once a month. The next meeting is on April 19th. And so you're all welcome to that. Just join our mailing list and show up. Fourthly, a round of applause for all of you for sticking with us through your endurance is appreciated. And check out our website. We have a lot of other events coming up soon that touch on a lot of topics mentioned. And in a week on Friday, Jaron and DJ Spooky are going to
pop something here. It should be really cool.
Yeah.
You should come.
Instruments, film screenings. It's going to be a variety show.
I'm not entirely sure, but I know it'll be great because DJ Spooky's a figure in New York City who's really renowned there, and he crosses over between the art and the hip hop worlds. And we just did a show there in the World Trade Center on top of the new one like a month ago, and it just went so well. We want to just do another one, so come on by in a week, exactly. Yeah.
Amy, you look like you wanted to. Oh, okay. So, oh yeah, in a week on Friday next week. We have some hackathons coming up. We have Am I talking to I hope not. What's tomorrow night? No, nobody asked me. I mean, maybe. I don't always know. They just C-suite stuff. I just get shuttled around these days. That's it. Let's get out of here. Thanks for coming.